Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of Education Law TV. I'm your host, Justin Bathen, and today I'm very excited. We are going global today with our education law conversations, and I'm very excited about it. Today we have with us Professors Rika, Jobert, and Professor John van Rooyan. Sorry, I'm not fantastic with my Afrikaans. I'm working on it, but today we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of books that they both have recently published, and also just reflect a little bit on education law in South Africa, some differences and some similarities maybe between the states and what they have going on there. So let me say a little bit about each of them, and then we'll roll into some questions. Rika Jobert is a professor at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and she has enormous classes, 3,000 students in a class, which was amazing to me. It's a totally different context than we have here in the States. She's one of the few education law professors in South Africa, and she's also director of the Inter-University Center for Education Law, Leadership, and Policy. So that is Professor Rika Jobert. Professor John van Rooyan is a professor of education management in the same department as Rika at the University of Pretoria. Rika teaches more educational law, and John teaches more educational finance and personnel maybe type courses. Professor John van Rooyan is also a member of the Inter-University Center, and he's the executive manager. So maybe the guy that does all the work? Is that
not
necessarily? Okay. Absolutely.
I hold the purse strings.
Absolutely. So the two books that are recently published I want to make you aware of. Rika has published The Law of Education in South Africa. A great text. I managed to read through several chapters, and I think it's fabulous. You learn so much about both the differences but also the similarities. I was really shocked about how much was similar. Maybe different constitutional provisions, but similar interpretations in some places. And Jean has recently published People, Leadership, and Education, educational leadership text on personnel for South African educational leadership scholars with several other authors. Both of these are available. Jean's is available from Heinemann Text South Africa, so Google that and then search for his book. And Rika's is available through Van Schaik Publishers, SCHAIK. Google that and then search for her text. When I looked at these, I think this one was 230 Rand, and this one was 200 some Rand, a little less, but like $30.
Yeah.
So
More than
yeah, very cheap for the Americans out there. So go ahead and grab a copy if you want to know more about what's going on in South Africa. So are those introductions fair? Anything else you'd like to add?
I think perhaps we can add that in addition to these students that you mentioned, the large numbers, that is in our distance program, and we are all involved in that. We also have students coming on campus. So we basically duplicate the courses, but on campus.
Yeah.
And those large numbers are in one program, but we offer different programs.
I don't think it's that dissimilar. It's similar to what's happening in the States, but the numbers are what's different.
Yeah,
because even on campus, you mentioned 100 students.
100 to 120
yeah.
would be in one class, but that would be in the... we have a program that you don't have, and that is called an honors program, which is something after the 4-year bachelor's degree and before doing a master's degree. We have a 2-year honors program.
It's an introduction into postgraduate studies.
Yes. And then, so we offer that program, and then students register for a master's program, and thereafter comes the PhD program.
Yes, it's exciting. All the different levels, and also all the students that are seeking leadership positions. I can imagine that, is this a relatively new phenomenon? Is this post-apartheid that this began, or has this been happening for a while?
Well, this has been part of our education system for as long as I can remember.
Okay.
To have this honours year as a bridge between undergraduate studies and your master's programs.
But the
Where
numbers,
principals are trained.
but the numbers, I think the reason why we have such large numbers is because very few universities in South Africa offer qualifications in education management.
Yeah, no worries. I'll pick up Laura's phone. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. They'll call back. So I think it is interesting, the large numbers and the change that's happening so fast. We'll get back to the Inter-University Center. So just talking a little bit about the rapid pace of change.
Maybe just to, before we get to the question of change, educational leadership and education law as fields of study have been introduced into South Africa in the late 70s, about 1978, thereabouts. That's where it all started, and has grown since. We have almost 30,000 schools in the country, and there is a real need for leadership training, not only for what you call administrators and we call principals of schools, but also the executive staff of a school. And even lower than that, in terms of class, we start with the basic skills of managing a classroom for the ordinary teacher.
Yes.
And then leadership and law are two integral parts of those programs.
Yeah, I don't think it's that different. We started with leadership 1910, 1915. But law as a component really did not start until late 50s, 60s, before we really had law as a component of that.
I think education law in South Africa didn't really figure in our programs prior to 1993 because it was not that important for principals to understand the new democratic laws.
Right.
It was more authoritative kind of governance of
Well, those
education.
were regulation the day previous to
So
the current dispensation. These things were regulation driven, or almost manual driven, rather than had a legal basis.
Yeah, so when you introduced democracy, then you had to have education law come.
So that was more when the field started developing. So before that, we had one or two scholars who wrote little books just with the basics of safety issues, but not really, constitutional rights or things because it didn't really exist.
That's fascinating. That really is fascinating, the tie between switching the governance structure and then needing right away, we need some training in education law for our school leaders to understand the system that they're a part of. That is really interesting. I think it'd be a great study, actually. Any of you out there listening, or any of your students in South Africa, what a great study that would be. Because, one of the great things is, in America, it's been a long time since we've had really big decisions come down. But everything is happening in a relatively short time in South Africa. Most of the people are still alive can speak to these issues.
Speak to them too. Yes.
Yeah. Fascinating. So tell us a little bit about the Inter-University Center, a little bit about what it does and its role in South Africa.
It was established in 1997 with the purpose of doing research and making information available to people out there, not specifically focusing only on educators or teachers, because we realize that now we've got the new Constitution and the new Schools Act coming out, but there's very little places that do study it and provide information. So the main purpose of the center is to do research and to publish and to even provide short training courses. So then we started in just after 1997 contracting people to start writing monographs, which we constantly revise as things change so rapidly. So I think one of the main factors or main things that we do at the Inter-University Centre is to try to make information available. So at the moment we have 7 monographs plus a book on school governance that's the result of research done on governance. And these books are mostly used by postgraduate students. And the members of the Inter-University Centre are universities who do have some education law faculty. Sometimes it's just one person because it's not a very common field in South African universities. But
maybe just establish this as well. Education law is not necessarily taught in the law faculties.
In the law to lawyers.
Students in law specifically.
I did a study. Only 1/3 of American law schools have an education law, a regular education law component.
Okay.
So
another 1/3 have it on the books, but offer it whenever someone feels like it. And then the last third just do not have it, period.
What happens in law faculties is that it is normally offered as not even a semester course or a full semester course, but it is part of, especially in the master's programs, where they do get exposure to the South African Schools Act. But any sort of detailed studies of education law is more often offered in the education faculties.
Yes.
I don't know whether that is also similar in the States.
Similar, but also not heavily focused, not a heavy focus in the education faculty either. You have a few universities, maybe similar to what you all have in South Africa, a few universities, Indiana, Penn State University, usually where you have very established scholars like yourselves, then you tend to see a couple of students come out of that. But there is no systematic process here either, which I also feel is very unfortunate. I've been fighting to try and make that more systematic.
Well, that's what we do. And we've tried since the establishment of the centre, and even through our own research to get other universities interested. We've got a Education Law Association that also organises an annual conference, and we try to take the conference to a different province each year with the hope of getting more people interested in the field of education law. But so far, most of education law is taught by either University of Pretoria or University of Northwest, and then we've got a very large distance education university called the University of South Africa, and they still teach education law in many of the programs. But the others, even the partners of the of our centre, just have perhaps one faculty member who constantly battles to keep a course into a teacher training program.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate. You gave a presentation yesterday where you were saying 20-some% of the government's budget is spent on education issues. 5%, 4%, 5% of GDP is allocated towards education. So enormous amount of money. Huge numbers of people. I mean, you have huge numbers of people in your program, let alone the number of teachers and principals out there. And yet it's not focused. It's a crazy situation.
Yeah.
And I don't understand it, but I'm glad to see that it's not the United States is the only one that has this challenge.
What is also contributing to the perhaps lack of really, perhaps I can say, interest in it is because South Africa is not a litigating country.
Yeah.
So the moment that changes, people will be much more careful and sensitive about legal issues, and then there would be a greater need so far, I think we are approaching education law just to inform people about the democratic changes and about the provisions in the Constitution and how that should apply to schools on ground level.
Yeah, I think this aspect is a really interesting one that you don't see a lot of litigation yet coming out of the school sector. And I think that has implications. I know in the book you speak of how there's so many terms that are not defined yet. And maybe you can say a little bit more about how that impacts the schools, having all of this law that doesn't have much meaning attached to it.
I can give a few examples. Our Constitution, for example, in Section 29, provides for everyone to have the right to basic education. But the word basic education is not really defined nor tested. So we don't know if you want to litigate on a right to basic education.
Right.
How would you go about? Secondly, our Constitution says that everyone has the right to receive instruction in the official language or languages of his or her choice, if practicable. Now, that if practicable is an interesting part of that provision. So far, we've had 4 language cases because, what is practicable and how do you determine when is it practical to provide instruction through more than one medium. So at the moment we do have a large number of schools providing their education in 2 languages, but it's still this problem of what is practicable that needs to be defined. And so we have many examples of a very nice provision, but not always easy to fully understand in practice.
And until they are unpacked in a court of law, one will have situations where it's open to interpretation.
Yeah, I think so.
For example, if everyone has the right to have freedom of cultural practices, a cultural association, freedom of culture, belief in religion, how far does that go? What can you do, for example, in a school that you can say, but this is my culture, or this is part of my belief? Those are things that
they really have to be worked out.
That have to be tested.
And I think this is where I think there's some good comparative opportunities because I think we had a similar situation here. We really did not become litigious related to education until the 1960s. I think Brown versus Board of Education did a lot of things, but one of the things that it did was clue people into, oh, wait a second, maybe I can use the courts to get what I want in schools. And so I think then in the 1960s and the 1970s, we saw really an explosion of litigation that has really fundamentally changed schools from places where anything goes to structured organizations that have legal rules, regulations, policies. Now, we can argue that's good or bad, and it's probably bad. I'm willing to admit that. But
you need a balance, I think, between not doing it or overdoing it.
Yes.
And I think it is so important. It doesn't help that you have the legislation, but you don't enforce it because you don't understand what it means.
Yeah. So we could see a similar pattern in South Africa.
I think it is already, the ball has already started rolling because we are already seeing more and more cases going to court. Not necessarily on contentious issues that relate to the rights of people, but it is more and more happening that people do insist that some or other dimension of the school in the education program be offered on a fair and equitable basis.
Yeah. That would be my guess as well. Is that it will start. I'm a little surprised if you think it started already. You're so close to the Constitution still. You're still so close to when you wrote it.
This whole process, I mean, if one look at the establishing democracy and you analyze it historically, that is processes that have taken centuries in other countries.
Yes.
And we have fast-tracked the whole process enormously.
Yeah.
In the process, we made mistakes and you had your stumbling blocks. But by and large, I think we're not doing too badly.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think you all are doing very well. I mean, certainly the constitutional provisions are, in many ways, go much further than constitutional provisions in the United States. Now, I think you have to work out what some of that means, but I think there's many education law scholars in the U.S. that would love to have some of those provisions that you all have in South Africa, where we have our Constitution does not speak to privacy at all, for instance. Well, nor does it speak to education either. It's a state thing, but still, there's just no definition of privacy. So for us, with teacher privacy or student privacy, we really don't know what to do in that regard.
Yeah, and that's why you have to rely on your case law.
Right.
I think our constitution was a negotiated constitution, which
is unique in its own sense.
And it's also the result of the history of South Africa. So all those things that was wrong, sort of in the past, is now addressed. And that's why the founding principles are human dignity or respect and equality and freedom. So, and then what is interesting is in most of these important provisions in the Constitution, we immediately get the statutes that gives more information as to how should this be interpreted and implemented. I mean, if you talk about access to information, you immediately get a full act explaining that, or the basic right to, or the right to basic education
is accommodated in the Schools
Act and many other of the educational acts for higher education, for further training, for qualifications framework and so on. So I think people have learned by looking all over the world and trying then to do things as fast as possible.
I think what necessitated this was the complexity of the society that we inherited after 94. And if we just look at the education system as such, I mean, prior to 94 elections, there were 18 different departments of education. And all of this had to be collapsed into a single education system. And unless you structured it very well, you would have had chaos.
Right.
And I think they did a sterling job in unpacking that.
Yeah.
By and large.
I mean, that's the complexity here is there's a lot of challenges that remain, a lot of definitions that have to be fleshed out. But if you do look at how much has happened in the amount of time that it has happened, it is stunning, the progress. It is really stunning even to us. We pass a law in the United States and we don't really see any impact of that law for 3, 4, 5 years. You don't have that kind of time in South Africa.
No, because the drive is so strong to the word that is used for everything in South Africa is to transform. So the transformation drive is so strong that everybody involved in policy making, in the legislative branch, is just working towards transformation, changing. I think you would rather use the word reform than transform. But
well, if I can use one example in terms of the financial management of the system. In 96, when the Schools Act was promulgated, certain provisions were made and built into the system to provide for equity. But that has been addressed in what we call the National Norms and Standards for School Funding, which was published in 98. And already by 2005, it was revised. And we have, in August 2006, we had a new set of rules to make provision for those aspects that we thought would work, that wasn't working properly. And that was, that was promulgated in 2000 or implemented in 2007, and already there are people who are constantly monitoring these things and then working on draft legislation to rectify where it doesn't work or it doesn't address the needs that we anticipate or envisage.
Yeah, it's so fast. Everybody is always working.
It's hands-on,
working on the next law by the time the first law comes out.
Yeah, and that is problematic and positive, because problems are addressed through legislation, but problematic because the amendments come so quickly that the people on the ground level is not always,
up to speed.
Informed. So
that is where this centre of ours plays a huge role in disseminating information.
Yeah, or trying to update the publications. And because we have these large numbers of students, if we have 3,000 students every semester and they each go home with a number of books with all the basic South African legal issues in it, at least we are spreading the message as fast as we can to reach schools.
Yeah, it really is a key. You're a key player in this because there's so few scholars that are out there working. The few that do exist really have a lot of responsibility on them too.
And that is very rewarding to think, okay, yes, we've got this, and it's every time when students get hold of the information and you see how they enjoy it, it's rewarding. So that is why we keep on doing it.
You guys are doing fabulous work in South Africa. I do want to come back, John. Is there anything you want to say about any personnel issues? I know the Labor parties play probably a much larger role than they here in Kentucky, for instance. Most of our districts are not unionized. We do not have a union, so I'm sure that's a little different.
Maybe to start with the title of the book, it's called People, Leadership in Education. That is sort of symbolic of the emphasis of the book. It is edited by my colleague Jan Heistek and 5 of us who work in the field of human resource management, or as we call it people management. Is the emphasis is placed on the teacher as being a key role player in the provisioning of quality education. We have developed a fairly new system and are rolling it out, what we call the integrated quality management system, that is used as a tool for assessment and development to provide a benchmark, and it's all individualized instead of a sort of a shotgun approach where you address people needs that do not exist. In terms of legislation regarding the human resource management in South Africa, it's mostly labor law issues, matters of tenure, and that kind of thing. And it is mostly driven by teacher unions. We are fairly unionized. The whole South African education system is covered by what is called the South African Council for Educators, which is the professional body that everybody has to register with before they can be appointed to a teacher position in a school. Okay. And they have taken the initiative to a large degree, and that will be rolled out as from next year, in terms of a continuous professional development program for individual educators. But the unions have their own legal counsel, all of them, that look after the labor law issues that are contentious in terms of tenure and or unfair dismissals or whatever the case may be.
So they have not just lawyers that are working at the governmental level for legislation, but also lawyers that will represent teachers out in the schools?
That's correct.
Oh, they have a few.
It's part of the membership benefits of joining a teacher union.
Yeah, similar
that you can
here.
have access to a lawyer. Unfortunately, we do have problems with our unions, especially one of our largest union is often a little bit negative, still protecting their teachers, and then in doing that, often being very negative as to professional development and providing quality education.
Not really wanting to change.
Yeah.
Just protecting the status quo.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We see the same.
Yeah, so you see the same. So that still happens, and that is one aspect that needs also to change a little bit more positively. We see changes because this union is one of the first unions who was. This union was already active during what we call the struggle years, in the process of changing the whole education system.
By definition, a teachers' union would be confrontational between the employer-employee, to cover the employer-employee situation. But we have found that through the mediation of the Council for Educators, specifically, and what we have, a body that we call the Education Labour Relations Council, which is a sort of a neutral forum where matters are thrashed out between the unions and the employers to come to a common understanding and hopefully in the best interest of the child. Everybody accepts that as a sort of a benchmark to work from.
Well, okay, so at least there's some hope of everyone keeps the child in mind. And here too, I mean, most districts, the union and the administration can work together pretty well. Mm-hmm. Once in a while, of course, we'll have a strike. And I saw in your constitution you have a right to strike.
And we have had a strike 2 years ago.
Yes, we had.
In a large district, or
that was countrywide.
They strike countrywide.
They strike countrywide in terms of raising salary that the unions have negotiated and that the government was not delivering on. So they forced them to do that.
Some of the unions strike for a longer period than others because we have different unions, and depending on what they decided. So in some of the schools, people only had a strike for a day, in others
for a week,
or even longer, depending on how the union organized it. And
that's amazing.
That's also
that's something we don't see here. One district at a time.
Yeah, you see, because the salary issue is different. In South Africa, the majority of our teachers are employed and paid by the government. So it's not as it is.
It's not a local function.
A local function.
One salary schedule.
Yes.
For the whole country.
For the whole country.
Amazing.
If schools can afford it, they often employ additional teachers, and then they can offer perhaps more subjects, or they can have smaller classes because they've got more teachers. But that depends on whether a school is in a richer area or in a poorer area.
This comes about
additional money.
Yes. This comes about because of the fact that in South Africa, schools are juristic persons, which is slightly different from what you have in the States. And because they are legal entities, they have legal capacity to enter into contracts. And the school's governing body act as the agent for the school as a legal entity. And then when they employ additional staff from school funds, they become the employer, which is a second set of labor relations that exist in the country.
So there can be two employers in one school.
Yes,
that's correct.
Frequently that happens. It seems that's the norm.
No, it's not the norm.
It's only for the few schools out of the 27 plus schools. That would be 27,000. That would be a small percentage who can afford it.
Okay.
I'd say it is between 40 and 45% of all schools may be in a financial position to consider doing that.
Yeah.
And it varies vastly amongst them the number of staff that they do employ. In very affluent schools, the staffing contingent that are employed by the school governing body may be more than what the state provides, or at least equal to that. But in schools that are not as affluent, it may be limited to 1 or 2 or even 3 people that are employed in addition to the staffing establishment provided by the state.
Very interesting to me. That's begging for some inequity issues there, where more affluent districts are supplementing their own education. Even though I think you're speaking of how richer districts may receive less money from the government, but still be able to supplement.
But we must remember that funding in South Africa's schools and public school system is not district-based. It is school-based. So you may have one district that have very affluent schools as well as very poor schools in the same district, because the geographic area covered by the districts in our education system differs vastly. They may be very large, covering a couple of 100 square miles, opposed to a district that covers maybe 10 square miles.
But there's no link between the district's boundaries and the municipalities. So
no, it's completely different.
Each province is just, divided into a number of districts, not necessarily linked to.
Each province, because we have 9 provinces, every province has more or less in the vicinity of 2,500 to 3,000 schools, and those schools are then divided into manageable units, which can be, as a sort of a rule of thumb, be in the vicinity of 150 to 200 schools in a school district.
Yeah, that's a lot of schools. Some of our larger cities have that, but the vast majority of American districts have 5-10 schools only. Well, it's absolutely fascinating stuff. The differences are enormous. For all of you scholars out there, I think that a great place to start learning about South Africa are these 2 books, and check out the Inter-University Center for Education Law, Leadership and Policy. You can Google it. It's on the web. You can even buy
the website
books.
Is www.celp.co.za.
Very good. So all of you out there, go check it out. Check out the work they're doing in South Africa. It really is amazing. And you all have a South African Education Law Conference that scholars may want to attend.
Yes, that happens annually, more or less in the second week of August. We moved the schedule in such a way that we can accommodate American scholars towards the end of your summer break.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you both for being here today. Thank you, Rika, and thank you, Jean. It's really fascinating. Thank you for coming to Kentucky and sharing, and coming to our Education Law Conference. And I think that there's so much room for comparative work here that I really would love to see some of us in the United States start working more closely and seeing not just in South Africa, but in all of the locations. I mean, you spoke about South Africa, but then as you go north up the continent, I mean, there's even more of a need. So,
thank you very much for hosting us.
It was lovely to meet you.
It will be wonderful to receive you all in South Africa, and we're looking forward to some comparative.
May this be the start of a long-standing relationship.
That's a great way to end it. Thanks.